The 13th tribe, the Khazar Empire and its heritage.
Attila was, after all, merely the king of a kingdom of tents. His state passed away, whereas the despised city of Constantinople remained a power. The tents vanished, the towns remained. The Hun state was a whirlwind. Thus, Cassel, a 19th century Orientalist, implying that the Khazars shared, for similar reasons, a similar fate. Yet the Hun presence on the European scene lasted a mere 80 years, whereas the kingdom of the Khazars held its own for the best part of 4 centuries. They too lived chiefly in tents, but they also had large urban settlements and were in the process of transformation from a tribe of nomadic warriors into a nation of farmers, cattle breeders, fishermen, vine growers, traders, and skilled craftsmen. Soviet archaeologists have unearthed evidence for a relatively advanced civilization, which was altogether different from the Hun whirlwind. They found the traces of villages extending over several miles, with houses connected by galleries to huge cattle heads, sheep pens, and stables. These measured 3 to 3.5 by 10 to 14 meters and were supported by columns. Some remaining ox plows showed remarkable craftsmanship. So did the preserved artifacts, buckles, clasps, ornamental saddle plates. Of particular interest was the foundations, sunk into the ground, of houses built in a circular shape. According to the Soviet archaeologists, these were found all over the territories inhabited by the Khazars and were of an earlier date than their normal rectangular buildings. Obviously, the round houses symbolizes the transition from portable, dome-shaped tents to permanent dwellings, from the nomadic to a settled, or rather semi-settled existence. For the contemporary Arab, sources tell us that the Khazars only stayed in their towns, including even their capital, idle during the winter. Come spring, they packed their tents, left their homes, and sallied forth with their sheep or cattle into the steeples, or camped in their cornfields or vineyards. The excavations also show that the kingdom was, during its later period, surrounded by an elaborate chain of fortifications dating from the 8th and 9th centuries, which protected its northern frontiers facing the open steppes. These fortresses formed a rough semicircular arc from the Crimea, which the Khazars ruled for a time, across the lower reaches of the Don and the Don to the Volga, while towards the south they were protected by the Caucasus, to the west by the Black Sea, and to the east by the Khazar Sea, the Caspian. However, the northern chain of fortifications marked merely an inner ring protecting the stable core of the Khazar country. The actual boundaries of their rule over the tribes of the north fluctuated according to the fortunes of war. At the peak of their power, they controlled or exacted tributes from some 30 different nations and tribes inhabiting the vast territories between the Caucasus, the Aral Sea, the Ural Mountains, the town of Kiev, and the Ukrainian steppes. The people under the Khazar suzerainty included the Bulgars, Burtas, Guz, Magyars, Hungarians, the Gothic and Greek colonies of the Crimea, and the Slavic tribes in the northwestern woodlands. Beyond these extended dominances, Khazar armies also raided Georgia and Armenia and penetrated into the Arab Cafulate as far as Mosul. In the words of the Soviet archaeologist M.I. Artamanov, until the 9th century, the Khazars had no rivals to their supremacy. In the regions north of the Black Sea and the adjoining steppes and forest regions of the Dnieper. The Khazars were the supreme masters of the southern half of Eastern Europe for a century and a half, and presented a mighty bulwark blocking the Ural-Caspian gateway from Asia into Europe. During this whole period, they held back the onslaught of nomadic tribes from the east. Taking a bird's-eye view of the history of the great nomadic empires of the east, the Khazar kingdom occupies an intermediary position in time, size, and degree of civilization between the Hun and Avar empires, which proceeded, and the Mongol empire that succeeded it. But who were these remarkable people? Remarkable as much by their power and achievements as by their conversion to a religion of outcasts. The descriptions that have come down to us originate in hostile sources. It cannot be taken at face value. As to the Khazars, an Arab chronicler writes, they are to the north of the inhabited earth towards the seventh clime, having over their heads the constellation of the plough. Their land is cold and wet. Accordingly, their complexions are white, their eyes blue, their hair flowing and predominantly reddish, their bodies large, and their natures cold. Their general aspect is wild. After a century of warfare, the Arab writer obviously had no great sympathy for the Khazars, nor had the Georgian or Armenian scribes, whose countries of a much older culture had been repeatedly devastated by Khazar horsemen. A Georgian chronicler, echoing an ancient tradition, identifies them with the host of Gog and Magog, wild men with hideous faces and the manners of wild beasts, eaters of blood. An Armenian writer refers to the horrible multitude of Khazars with insolent, broad, lashless faces and long flowing hair like women. Lastly, the Arab geographer Takhiri, one of the main Arab sources, has this to say: the Khazars do not resemble the Turks. They are black-haired and are of two kinds, one called the Kara Khazars, black Khazars, who are swarthy, verging on deep black as if they were a kind of Indian, and a white kind, Ak Khazars, who are strikingly handsome. This is more flattering, but only adds to the confusion, for it was customary among Turkish peoples to refer to the ruling classes or clans as white, to the lower strata as black. Thus, there is no reason to believe that the white Bulgars were whiter than the black Bulgars, or that the white Huns, the Iphtalates, who invaded India and Persia in the 5th and 6th centuries, were of fairer skin than the other Hun tribes which invaded Europe. Iztak, Huris, black-skinned Khazars, as much else in his and his colleagues' writings, were based on hearsay and we are none the wiser regarding the Khazars' physical appearance or their ethnic origins. The last question can only be answered in a vague and general way, but it is equally frustrating to inquire into the origins of the Huns, Alans, Avars, Bulgars, Magyars, Bashkirs, Burtas, Sabers, Uyghurs, Saragurs, Onogurs, Utagurs, Kutagurs, Tarinaks, Kotragars, Kabars, Zabenders, Pichingins, Guns, Kumans, Kipchaks, and dozens of other tribes or peoples who at one time or another in the lifetime of the Khazar kingdom passed through the turnstiles of those migratory playgrounds. Even the Huns, of whom we know much more, are of uncertain origin. Their name is apparently derived from the Chinese Huing Nu, which designates warlike nomads in general, while other nations apply the name Hun in a similarly indiscriminate way to nomadic hordes of all kinds, including the White Huns mentioned above, the Sabirs, Magyars, and Khazars. In the 1st century AD, the Chinese drove these disagreeable Hun neighbors westward, and thus started one of those periodic avalanches which swept for many centuries from Asia towards the west. From the 5th century onward, many of these westward bound tribes were called by the generic name of Turks. The term is also supposed to be of Chinese origin, apparently derived from the name of a hill, and was subsequently used to refer to all tribes who spoke languages with certain common characteristics, the Turkic language group. Thus, the name Turk, in the sense in which it was used by medieval writers, and often also by modern ethnologists, refer primarily to language and not to race. In this sense, the Huns and Khazars were Turkic people. The Khazar language was supposedly a Chulvash dialect of Turkish, which still survives in the autonomous Chuvash Soviet Republic between the Volga and the Sura. The Chuvash people are actually believed to be the descendants of the Bulgars, who spoke a dialect similar to the Khazars. But all these connections are rather tenuous based on the more or less speculative deductions of Oriental philologists. All we can say with safety is that the Khazars were a Turkish tribe who erupted from the Asian steppes probably in the 5th century of our era. The origin of the name Khazar and the modern derivations to which it gave rise has also been the subject of much ingenious speculation. Most likely the word is derived from the Turkish root gaz, to wander, and simply means nomad. Of greater interest to the non-speculatist are some alleged modern derivations from it, among them the Russian Cossack and the Hungarian Hussar, both signifying martial horsemen. And also the German Ketzer, heretic. Example, Jew. If these derivations are correct, they would show that the Khazars had a considerable impact on the imagination of a variety of people in the Middle Ages.